After I warned my wife not to travel with her male boss. My wife texted, "We'll be back on Monday. I'll explain everything later," I replied. Good. My lawyer loves stories. Her calls didn't stop after that. You ever notice how every catastrophic life decision starts with someone you love saying something that sounds completely innocent? Like, "I'm just going to the store real quick," and then they come back 3 hours later with a new haircut, a rescue parrot, and zero explanation. Well, that's exactly the vibe I got when my wife, Lydia, dropped the conversational equivalent of a grenade into our Tuesday night pasta dinner and casually mentioned she was flying out for a team-building conference with her male boss, Derek. Yeah, Derek. The same Derek who spent 6 consecutive months calling me Larry at company barbecues because he thought it was the height of comedic genius. Even after I corrected him roughly 47 times and contemplated getting my name legally tattooed on my forehead just to drive the point home. I laughed when she told me, but it wasn't one of those genuine laughs where your soul feels light and everything's okay with the universe. No, this was the kind of laugh that comes from deep in your gut, the place where all your red flags are stored in alphabetical order, cross-referenced by date and level of concern. This was the "I'm silently updating my life insurance policy and wondering if WebMD has a section on emotional trauma" kind of laugh. The kind of laugh that says, "I heard you. I'm processing this information, and I'm already 3 steps ahead planning my exit strategy while simultaneously hoping I'm just being paranoid." "It's just business, babe," Lydia said, twirling her fork in her carbonara like she was auditioning for a cooking show instead of potentially torpedoing our marriage. She had that tone, you know, the one, where everything sounds reasonable and you're the crazy person for even questioning it. Like I'm supposed to just nod along while my wife books a romantic getaway disguised as corporate synergy with a guy who probably thinks Boundaries is a new streaming service. Sure, I replied, keeping my voice steady even though internally I was conducting a full forensic analysis of every interaction she'd ever had with Derek, including that time he accidentally put his hand on her lower back during the holiday party, and I had to resist the urge to accidentally put my fist through his dental work. Because every marriage needs a trust fall exercise in another city, preferably one with hotel wine, dim lighting, and a distinct lack of spouses. Really strengthens the foundation, I hear. The marriage counselors are all recommending it these days. Chapter 7. How to destroy your relationship in 5 business days or less. She gave me that look, the one that wives perfect over years of marriage. The look that says, "You're being ridiculous," and "I can't believe I have to deal with this," and "Why did I marry someone who thinks critically," all rolled into one expertly crafted expression of exasperation. I know that look intimately. I've seen it when I forgot to take out the trash, when I bought the wrong brand of almond milk, and now, apparently, when I had the audacity to question why my wife needed to spend 3 nights in a luxury hotel with her boss, who has the emotional intelligence of a golden retriever and the professional boundaries of a reality TV star. I warned her, and I want to be clear about this because what happened next is going to sound like I didn't try. I absolutely tried. I sat down, looked her dead in the eyes with the kind of sincerity usually reserved for marriage proposals and terminal diagnoses, and said, "Lydia, don't go if it's not necessary. I'm asking you, as your husband, as someone who supposedly matters in your decision-making process, to really think about whether this trip is worth whatever it might cost us." I wasn't yelling. I wasn't throwing things. I was being the mature, communicative partner that every relationship expert says you're supposed to be. The guy who uses his words and expresses his concerns like a functional adult instead of a caveman with trust issues. She rolled her eyes so hard I'm pretty sure she saw her own brain, which clearly wasn't working at full capacity if she thought this was a good idea. "You're being insecure," she said, like insecurity was this horrible character flaw instead of a completely rational response to sketchy circumstances. Like I was supposed to just hand her a suitcase, wave goodbye from the porch, and go about my week pretending my wife wasn't about to star in her own low-budget drama titled, "What Could Possibly Go Wrong? A Business Trip Story." "I'm not being insecure," I corrected her, stabbing a piece of chicken with more force than was probably necessary. "I'm being observational. There's a difference. Insecure is thinking you're going to cheat because I don't trust you. Observational is noticing that this entire situation has more red flags than a communist parade and wondering why you're so eager to ignore them." Insecure is irrational fear. This is pattern recognition. This is basic risk assessment. This is me using the critical thinking skills that evolution gave me specifically to avoid situations where I end up as the punchline in someone else's story about how they ruined their marriage. She pushed her plate away, which in married people language means this conversation is over and you've lost. She stood up, grabbed her wine glass like it was a trophy for winning an argument she absolutely hadn't won, and said, "I'm going. It's important for my career. You'll just have to trust me." Trust. That word hung in the air like a fart in an elevator, impossible to ignore and making everyone uncomfortable. Trust is what you're supposed to have in a marriage, sure, but trust without verification is just called being naive, and I'd already used up my lifetime supply of naivety back when I believed that working late actually meant working and not building emotional connections with coworkers over shared takeout and complaints about their spouses. Trust is great until it's weaponized, until it becomes this thing that gets thrown in your face every time you dare to question something that any reasonable person would question. That night, after she went to bed early, probably to avoid further conversation or because she needed her beauty sleep for her upcoming performance in the conference that definitely wasn't an affair, I sat in the living room with a beer that tasted like regret and scrolled through my phone looking at pictures from when we first got married. Back when her smiles were genuine and meant for me. Back when business trip meant she actually came home and told me about the boring presentations and complained about the hotel pillows. Back when Derek was just some name she mentioned occasionally and not the third person in our marriage who didn't even have the decency to pay rent or do dishes. I'm not an idiot, despite what this situation might suggest about my judgment in life partners. I know what team building means in corporate speak. It means trust falls and rope courses and those stupid exercises where you're supposed to communicate without talking, all designed to make you bond with your coworkers so you'll work harder and complain less about the soul-crushing meaninglessness of corporate existence. But team building doesn't require luxury hotels. It doesn't require your boss specifically, and it definitely doesn't require the kind of excited energy Lydia was radiating, the kind of energy she used to reserve for our anniversary dinners and surprise weekend getaways, before those became too expensive and not a priority right now. So yeah, I laughed when she told me about the trip. I laughed because the alternative was screaming or crying or both, and I'm trying to maintain some dignity here. I laughed because sometimes that's all you can do when you see the train wreck coming but you're tied to the tracks and nobody's listening to your warnings. I laughed because in that moment, sitting across from my wife who was already mentally checked out and probably planning what lingerie to pack, I realized that this wasn't just about a business trip. This was about respect, or the complete lack thereof. This was about her choosing to do something she knew would hurt me, something she knew would damage us, because whatever she was getting from Derek and this conference was apparently worth more than what we had built together over 7 years of marriage. But sure, Lydia, it's just business. Just like the Titanic was just a boat ride. Just like Hiroshima was just a bad day. Just like this marriage is just a temporary arrangement until something better comes along. I heard you loud and clear, babe. Message received, decoded, and filed away for future reference in the legal proceedings that I'm definitely not already planning in the back of my mind like a chess player who sees checkmate 6 moves ahead. Welcome to Chapter 1 of How My Marriage Became a Cautionary Tale. Spoiler alert, it gets worse before it gets better, but at least the ending is satisfying. Thursday morning arrived with all the enthusiasm of a funeral procession, and I woke up to the sound of Lydia rummaging through our closet like she was preparing for an invasion instead of a 3-day conference that supposedly involved PowerPoint presentations and networking sessions. I'm talking full-scale tactical preparation here, the kind of packing operation that would make military logistics officers weep with envy. She had 3 suitcases spread across our bedroom floor, which seemed excessive considering the email invitation she'd accidentally left open on her laptop specifically said, "Business casual attire, and please pack light." But hey, what do I know about appropriate conference preparation? I've only been to about 15 of them, and I've never once needed an evening gown or that little black dress that still had the price tag attached, the one that cost more than our monthly grocery budget and screamed, "Definitely not for boardroom presentations." The perfume situation alone should have won some kind of award for suspicious behavior. Lydia was pulling out bottles I didn't even know existed in our house, testing them on her wrists like she was preparing for a date with a fragrance sommelier instead of a team-building retreat with Steve from accounting and whatever other poor souls were allegedly attending this corporate bonding experience. There was this one bottle, some French name I couldn't pronounce that probably translated to homewrecker or bad decisions, that she'd received as a Christmas gift from her sister 2 years ago and never once worn. Not for our anniversary, not for my company holiday party, not even for that wedding we went to where she claimed she wanted to look special. But apparently, Derek and the fictional conference committee deserved the premium scent experience. You need 3 pairs of heels for a business conference? I asked from the doorway, watching her carefully wrap them in tissue paper like they were ancient artifacts being transported to a museum instead of shoes that were going to spend most of their time under a conference table or, let's be honest, under a hotel bed. She didn't even look up, just kept methodically folding clothes with the kind of focus usually reserved for surgeons and bomb defusal experts. I like to have options, she said, which is woman speak for, I don't want to explain my choices to you, because we both know this doesn't add up, and I'm hoping you won't press the issue. Options. Right. Because when I go to conferences, I definitely pack my tuxedo, my casual tux, and my backup emergency tuxedo, just in case the team-building activities suddenly turn into the Oscars. The logic was bulletproof, really. Absolutely no holes whatsoever. She had packed 4 new dresses, 2 of which I'd never seen before, which meant she'd gone shopping specifically for this trip and somehow forgot to mention it during our nightly "How was your day?" conversations that had apparently become optional. There was a red number that was so low-cut it needed its own engineering degree, a blue one with a slit up the side that would make a burlesque dancer blush, and 2 others that fell into the category of why bother wearing anything at all. But sure, these were definitely appropriate for trust falls and strategic planning sessions. Maybe they were planning to build trust by seeing how much fabric they could remove before HR got involved. The real kicker, the detail that really sold the whole charade, was when I noticed she'd packed her hair curler and straightener, both plugged in and ready to go, along with enough hair products to open a small salon, but her work laptop was still sitting on the kitchen counter next to yesterday's coffee mug, completely forgotten like an afterthought or that one coworker nobody invites to lunch. When I pointed this out, helpfully carrying it to the bedroom like the supportive husband I was clearly failing to be, she waved me off. "Oh, I'll just use my tablet," she said. "Derek's bringing the presentation files on a shared drive anyway." Derek's bringing them. Of course he is. Because what's a business trip without being completely dependent on your boss for all your work materials? It's not like she could access files independently or bring her own equipment like a professional adult. No, much better to be tethered to Derek and his shared drive, probably sharing a lot more than just PowerPoint slides and quarterly projections. She kissed me goodbye at the door with all the passion and sincerity of someone signing a legal document they hadn't read. That quick peck that's more about obligation than affection. The kind of kiss that says, "This is what married people do," rather than, "I'm going to miss you." It was the emotional equivalent of a participation trophy, technically meeting the minimum requirement while putting in 0 actual effort. Her lips touched mine for approximately 0.5 seconds before she pulled away, already mentally checked out and probably running through her packing list one more time to make sure she hadn't forgotten the lingerie I definitely saw tucked into the side pocket of her carry-on. "Be safe," I said, because what else do you say to someone who's about to walk out the door and potentially out of your marriage? Have fun at your very real and legitimate business conference that definitely exists and isn't just an excuse for something I'm going to regret not preventing. Okay, I didn't say that last part out loud, but my tone said it for me. My tone was doing all kinds of heavy lifting that morning, carrying the weight of suspicion, disappointment, and the growing realization that I was married to someone who thought I was either stupid or blind, possibly both. "I'll text when I land," she said, which in retrospect was the first lie of many, though I didn't know it yet. At the time, I took her at her word like an idiot, like someone who still believed that marriage vows meant something, and "I'll text you" wasn't just verbal filler designed to get her out the door faster. She grabbed her suitcases, all 3 of them, and rolled them down the driveway to her Uber like she was leaving for a month-long expedition to Antarctica instead of a 3-day conference 2 states over. The Uber driver, a middle-aged guy with kind eyes who probably had his own marriage problems, helped her load everything into the trunk while I stood in the doorway like a chump, waving goodbye to my wife and my dignity simultaneously. She didn't text when she landed. Shocker, I know. 4 hours passed, which was plenty of time for her flight, landing, baggage claim, and hotel check-in, plus enough buffer time to account for traffic, bathroom breaks, and stopping for a celebratory cocktail at the airport bar. But my phone stayed silent except for a spam call about my car's extended warranty and a notification that our credit card bill was due, which felt ominously appropriate given what was probably happening to our joint finances at that very moment. So I did what any reasonable person with a smartphone and a growing sense of dread would do. I tracked her flight. Not because I'm some controlling psychopath who needs to monitor his wife's every movement, but because Google exists, flight tracking apps are free, and I love a good plot twist almost as much as I love being proven right about my suspicions. The flight had landed on time at 2:47 p.m. It was now 7:30 p.m. The math wasn't mathing, as the kids say these days. Or maybe that's already outdated slang, because I'm apparently too old and married to keep up with cultural trends or recognize when my wife is lying to my face. I checked her location on Find My Friends, that app we'd set up years ago for safety purposes that had now become my window into discovering exactly how unsafe my marriage was. She was at the Grand Riviera Hotel, which I immediately Googled because I'm thorough like that, and also because I enjoy torturing myself with evidence of my own naivety. 5 stars. Rooftop bar with city views. Spa services. In-room jacuzzis. And here's the really fun part. The company handbook, which I'd read exactly once during a bout of insomnia last year, specifically states that business travel accommodations should be reasonable and cost-effective, not exceeding business class standards. This hotel had suites that cost more per night than I made in a week. This was the kind of place you took your mistress, not your management team. Meanwhile, back in reality where I apparently lived alone now, I was sitting in our kitchen eating leftover spaghetti straight from the Tupperware container like a widowed raccoon who'd given up on dignity and proper dinnerware. I didn't even heat it up. Just sat there in the growing darkness, lit only by the refrigerator light and my phone screen, shoveling cold pasta into my mouth while wondering at what exact moment I'd married a woman who apparently had a secret minor in infidelity and a major in creative excuses. The spaghetti tasted like betrayal and oregano, which is a flavor combination I wouldn't recommend to anyone going through a potential marital crisis. Our dog, Max, a golden retriever who usually lost his mind with excitement whenever Lydia came home, just looked at me with those knowing eyes that dogs have. The ones that say, I could have told you this was coming, but you don't speak dog, and also I'm more interested in whether you're going to finish that spaghetti. Even the dog knew something was off. Even the dog could sense that the pack dynamics had shifted, that alpha female had abandoned the den for shinier territory and better-smelling males who probably gave her treats and told her she deserved more than a husband who remembered anniversaries and did half the housework. I poured myself a whiskey, the good stuff we'd been saving for special occasions, and decided that discovering your wife's true priorities definitely qualified as special, if not particularly joyous. The bottle was a gift from my father, given to me on our wedding day with the advice to save it for when you really need it. Dad always was perceptive. He'd met Lydia exactly 3 times before giving me that bottle, and now I wondered if he'd seen something I'd missed, some fundamental incompatibility or character flaw that I'd been too in love or too stupid to recognize. When exactly had I married a motivational speaker for corporate affairs? When had my wife transformed from the woman who used to text me throughout the day just to say she missed me into someone who couldn't be bothered to send a single message confirming she'd arrived safely? These were the questions keeping me company along with my cold spaghetti and expensive whiskey, in a house that suddenly felt too big and too empty, with a marriage that was clearly smaller and more fragile than I'd ever wanted to admit. By the second day of Lydia's conference, I'd officially entered what I like to call the ghosting Olympics, where my wife was going for gold in the how long can you ignore your husband event and absolutely crushing the competition, which in this case was non-existent because apparently I was the only idiot participating. Friday morning rolled around, and I woke up to a grand total of 0 messages from my beloved spouse, which was particularly impressive considering she'd promised to stay in touch and keep me updated before she left. I guess those promises had the same shelf life as gas station sushi, expired before they even got started. I sent my first text around 8 in the morning, right after my coffee and right before my existential crisis really kicked into high gear. How's the conference? Simple, straightforward, the kind of message that doesn't sound accusatory or needy. Just a concerned husband checking in on his wife who was supposedly in a different state learning about quarterly projections and synergistic team dynamics, or whatever corporate buzzwords they were pretending to care about. I watched the little delivered notification pop up, watched it sit there like a tombstone marking the death of prompt communication, and went about my day trying not to check my phone every 45 seconds like some kind of anxious teenager waiting for his crush to notice him. 7 hours later, right around 3 in the afternoon when I was seriously considering filing a missing person report or at least a missing spouse report with the Better Business Bureau, my phone finally buzzed with her response. 7 hours to respond to a forward question. I've had slower responses from customer service chatbots and government agencies. Crazy schedule. Her text read, like that explained the communication blackout. Barely sleeping. Miss you though, red heart. And there it was, the heart emoji, deployed like a tactical weapon designed to neutralize suspicion and make me feel guilty for even questioning her radio silence. The heart emoji, that little piece of digital emotional manipulation that's supposed to make everything okay, supposed to convince me that someone who can't be bothered to send a text for 7 hours definitely still loves me and isn't currently involved in activities that would violate our marriage contract. Yeah, because when you genuinely miss someone, when you're lying awake at night thinking about your partner and wishing they were there, you definitely express those deep feelings through a mass-produced cartoon heart that requires zero effort and even less sincerity. It's the emotional equivalent of those thoughts and prayers, posts people make after tragedies, technically acknowledging the situation while doing absolutely nothing of substance. That heart emoji was a coupon for affection, a discount version of actual love that she could slap onto any message to make it seem like she cared while putting in minimal emotional labor. I didn't respond immediately because I was busy doing some investigative journalism that would make Watergate reporters proud. See, what Lydia apparently forgot in her haste to pack 17 dresses and 0 work equipment was that we live in the age of social media, where people document every single moment of their lives like they're creating evidence for future historians studying the decline of Western civilization. If there really was a conference happening, if there really were team-building activities and professional development sessions, then surely someone would be posting about it. Surely the company's official social media accounts would have photos, updates, maybe some inspirational quotes over stock images of people in business suits high-fiving or whatever passes for corporate content these days. So I started scrolling, and boy, did I find something. Nina Chun, Lydia's co-worker and the office gossip who could probably run TMZ if she ever left the corporate world, had been posting up a storm. And I mean a literal storm of content, the kind of posting frequency that suggested she was definitely not sitting through boring presentations or participating in trust falls. Her Instagram was a highlight reel of poolside selfies, sunset cocktails, and what appeared to be a very relaxed interpretation of business casual that involved bikinis and sunglasses that cost more than my car payment. The photos were tagged #company_retreat and #team_fun, which already sounded less like professional development and more like a vacation someone else was paying for. But here's what really got me. I scrolled through every single photo Nina posted, and I'm talking dozens of them because the woman had apparently decided to become an influencer for the weekend. Beach shots, pool shots, restaurant shots, bar shots, enough content to fill a travel brochure. And in all of those photos, all of those carefully curated moments documenting the team-building experience, I didn't see my wife once. Not a single appearance. Not even a blurry background cameo. It was like Lydia had decided to opt out of social media documentation entirely, which was weird considering she usually posted everything from her morning coffee to her afternoon snack, like she was creating a visual diary for people who didn't ask to see it. But you know who I did see? Derek. Good old Derek, my wife's boss. The man who'd spent half a year calling me the wrong name like it was a bit he was committed to. There he was in Nina's photos, shirtless and proud of it, showing off a dad bod that suggested his gym membership was purely theoretical. He was holding 2 glasses of wine in one photo, standing by the pool with what I can only describe as the confidence of a man who thought he was God's gift to middle management. 2 glasses of wine. 2. And unless Derek had developed the ability to drink ambidextrously or had suddenly taken up juggling as a hobby, that second glass was meant for someone. Someone who wasn't appearing in photos. Someone who was apparently too busy being barely sleeping to participate in social media documentation. The math was mateing now, and I didn't like what it was adding up to. My wife was at a luxury resort. Her boss was holding 2 wine glasses, and neither of them were appearing in the official team photos. Meanwhile, the actual team was out by the pool having documented fun while my wife and her boss were doing. What exactly? Having a very private, very intense discussion about quarterly earnings? Reviewing performance metrics in complete isolation? Engaging in some kind of advanced team-building exercise that required absolute secrecy and double the wine? I made a mental note right then and there, sitting on my couch with my phone in one hand and what remained of my sanity in the other. Next time Lydia says team building, I'm buying her a hammer, some nails, and a stack of lumber, and she can build an actual treehouse in the backyard. At least then the only thing getting screwed would be the wooden planks, and I'd have something tangible to show for the investment of time and money instead of just mounting credit card bills and disappearing dignity. I spent the rest of Friday doing what any rational person would do in my situation. I became a detective. Not the cool kind from movies who solve crimes and look good in trench coats, but the sad kind who sits at home in sweatpants analyzing Instagram posts like they're ancient hieroglyphics containing the secrets of the universe. I checked Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, because apparently I thought maybe my wife and her boss were updating their professional networks between romantic interludes, and every other social platform I could think of. I even checked TikTok, despite being 37 years old, and having no idea how that app works beyond knowing it's somehow both 3 seconds and 3 hours long, depending on how you use it. The pattern was consistent. Lots of documentation of the team having fun, 0 documentation of Lydia or Derek participating in said fun, and an increasingly clear picture of what was probably happening when people decided not to appear in photos together. It's like they'd read a handbook on how to have an affair and followed the chapter on digital footprint management a little too carefully. Don't post together. Don't tag each other. Maintain plausible deniability. The only thing missing was a burner phone and a fake mustache. I texted her again that evening, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment, and also because some small, stupid part of me wanted to give her a chance to prove me wrong. Saw Nina's posts. Looks like everyone's having fun. Where are you in all the photos? It was a test, a gentle one, phrased like curiosity instead of accusation. I watched that message sit on delivered for another 3 hours before she responded with, been in meetings most of the day. Just finished dinner. Dinner. Right. Dinner that took 3 hours to eat and apparently required her phone to be surgically removed from her hand because, God forbid, she check her messages between courses. That night, I poured another whiskey. The special occasion bottle was getting a serious workout and sat in our living room that felt more like a mausoleum than a home, thinking about all the times I'd been the idiot who believed the easy lie instead of trusting my gut. Every working late excuse I'd accepted. Every it's just lunch with coworkers explanation I'd nodded along with. Every time Derek's name had come up in conversation and I'd pushed down that weird feeling in my stomach because surely I was being paranoid. Surely my wife wouldn't be that cliche. Surely I was worth more than being the punchline in someone else's midlife crisis story. Max wandered over and put his head on my knee, which is what dogs do when they sense their human is having what therapists call a moment. I scratched behind his ears and wondered if I should have been a dog person exclusively, if maybe limiting my trust to animals who literally couldn't betray me beyond occasionally eating my shoes was the smarter life choice. At least dogs are honest about their motivations. They want food, walks, and belly rubs, and they don't pretend it's about career development or networking opportunities. If suspicion burned calories, I'd have had abs that would make fitness models weep with envy. I'd have been shredded, absolutely jacked from the sheer metabolic energy of constantly analyzing every text message, every social media post, every gap in communication. I'd have looked like I trained for the Olympics instead of just competing in the emotional Olympics where the only prize was the knowledge that I'd been right to be worried, and the participation trophy was crippling trust issues for future relationships. But I didn't confront her yet. I wanted receipts, not drama. I wanted evidence that would hold up in court, metaphorical or otherwise. I wanted to be absolutely, unquestionably certain before I pulled the trigger on whatever needed to happen next. Because once you accuse someone of something like this, you can't take it back. Once you say, I think you're cheating, the marriage either survives and becomes stronger or it dies right there on the spot. And I wasn't ready to kill it yet. Not until I had proof. Not until I could look myself in the mirror and know beyond any doubt that I'd done everything right and she'd done everything wrong. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of cruel sunshine that makes you want to punch the weather in its stupid, optimistic face. All bright and cheerful like the universe hadn't gotten the memo that my life was currently circling the drain. I woke up to my phone ringing at 7:30 in the morning, which is universally recognized as an ungodly hour on the weekend and should be illegal except in cases of emergencies or lottery winnings. It was Lydia calling, and for a brief, stupid moment, my heart did that hopeful thing where it thinks maybe everything's fine. Maybe she's calling to apologize. Maybe she's realized the error of her ways and is coming home early to throw herself at my mercy and beg forgiveness. Yeah, no, that's not what happened. Hey babe, she said, her voice all business casual, like she was calling to confirm a dentist appointment instead of checking in with the husband she'd been systematically ignoring for 48 hours. There was background noise, the kind you hear in hotel lobbies with their fountains and elevator music and the general ambience of people having better days than you. Can't talk long. Derek's presenting tomorrow, and we need to prep. Derek's presenting. Derek's presenting tomorrow. Let that sentence marinate for a second. Really let it sink in and ferment into the pile of bullshit it so clearly was. It was Saturday. The presentation was allegedly on Sunday, which meant they still had a full day. Yet somehow this required immediate attention at 7:30 in the morning when normal people who weren't involved in suspicious activities were sleeping off their Friday night wine and contemplating whether pancakes or waffles were the better breakfast choice. Presenting what exactly? I asked, keeping my voice level even though internally I was screaming into the void. His midlife crisis? Because I've got to say, that's been pretty well documented already. Maybe he could use some of Nina's Instagram photos as visual aids. Really drive home the point about authentic leadership or whatever corporate nonsense you people pretend to care about. She laughed, but it was that nervous laugh people do when they've been caught, but haven't fully committed to the lie yet. That weird sound that's half genuine amusement and half, oh shit, he's onto me. It was the audio equivalent of someone sweating through their shirt during a polygraph test. You're funny, she said, which is what people say when you're not being funny at all, but they need to fill the silence with something other than the truth. Look, I really have to go. We'll talk more when I get back. And then she hung up. Just like that. Didn't wait for me to respond. Didn't ask how I was doing. Didn't inquire about Max or the house, or whether I'd burned the place down in a fit of justified rage. Just hung up like I was a telemarketer she'd been too polite to dismiss earlier. I stared at my phone screen, at her contact photo from 2 years ago when we'd gone to that beach resort for our anniversary, and she'd looked at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered, and I wondered when exactly that woman had been replaced by this stranger who couldn't even spare 5 minutes for her husband, but apparently had unlimited time for Derek and his presentation needs. That night, I made a decision. Actually, several decisions, all of them powered by spite and expensive whiskey, which is honestly the best decision-making fuel known to man. I decided I was done playing the waiting game, done sitting at home like a loyal dog hoping his owner would remember to come back and feed him. I cooked myself a steak, a good one, the kind we usually save for special occasions or when Lydia wanted to celebrate something at work. Medium rare, perfectly seasoned, with garlic butter melting over the top like liquid gold. I made roasted potatoes, asparagus with Parmesan, the whole production. I set the table for one, used the good plates we'd gotten as wedding gifts and had barely touched because apparently we were saving them for company that never came or occasions that never felt special enough. I poured whiskey for two, though, because I'm petty like that, and also because the symbolism felt right. 1 glass for me, 1 glass for the ghost of my marriage, both of us drinking to the inevitable conclusion of this shit show. I raised my glass to the empty chair across from me and toasted to my own sanity, to the part of my brain that had been screaming warnings since Tuesday and was finally being validated, to the future version of myself who who would look back on this moment and hopefully laugh instead of cry. The steak was perfect. The whiskey was smooth. The company was terrible, but at least it was honest. Max sat next to me, eyeing the meat with the kind of focused intensity that dogs reserve for food and squirrels, and I slipped him a piece because at least somebody in this house appreciated my efforts and didn't lie about where they were spending their nights. If suspicion burned calories, I'd have had abs by then. The kind of abs you see on fitness magazine covers with headlines like, "This one weird trick doctors hate." I'd have been absolutely shredded, totally jacked, with a physique that would make Greek statues jealous. Every anxious thought, every analyzed text message, every moment spent wondering what my wife was doing and who she was doing it with. All of that nervous energy would have transformed into pure muscle. I'd have been a specimen, a marvel of human anatomy powered entirely by emotional turmoil and justified paranoia. But I wasn't confronting her yet. That was the important part, the detail that separated me from every angry husband in every bad movie who goes off half-cocked and ends up looking like the crazy one. I wanted receipts. I wanted documentation. I wanted evidence that would hold up in court, in divorce proceedings, in the court of public opinion when our friends inevitably asked what happened and why Lydia was suddenly single and I was mysteriously unbothered by the whole thing. I wanted proof so ironclad that even her mother, who'd never particularly liked me and made it clear at every family gathering that her daughter could have done better, would have to admit that her precious Lydia had screwed up spectacularly. So I did what any rational person in the digital age would do. I quietly checked our joint credit card statement. Not secretly, mind you, because it was my card too, my name on the account, my legal right to see where our money was being spent. I logged into the account on my laptop, poured myself another whiskey because this felt like a moment that required liquid courage, and started scrolling through the charges from the past 2 days. Oh boy. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. If I'd had any doubts before, any lingering hope that maybe I was wrong and my wife really was at a legitimate business conference doing legitimate business things, those doubts evaporated faster than water on a hot sidewalk. The charges didn't just suggest vacation. They screamed it. They got a megaphone and announced it to the world. They took out a billboard advertisement declaring, "This is not a business trip, you absolute moron." Friday night, 7:45 p.m. The Skyline Rooftop Restaurant. $347. For 2 people, because the itemized receipt showed 2 entrees, 2 appetizers, a bottle of wine that cost more than my monthly car payment, and dessert. Business dinner? Sure. If your business is romance, and your quarterly projections involve seeing how much money you can spend while destroying your marriage. Saturday morning, 9:15 a.m., Serenity Spa and Wellness Center. $412. For a couples massage. A couples massage. The charge literally said couples relaxation package, right there in the description, like they weren't even trying to hide it anymore, like they decided subtlety was overrated and might as well go full rom-com montage with the betrayal. Saturday afternoon, 2:30 p.m., room service. The Grand Riviera Hotel, room 847. $193. For what, I wondered? What could possibly cost almost $200 from room service? I pulled up the hotel's room service menu online because I'm thorough like that and discovered it was champagne, chocolate-covered strawberries, and what the menu described as a romantic charcuterie board for 2. Romantic. They used that word. In the description of the room service my wife ordered with her boss, using our joint credit card, while I was at home eating leftover spaghetti like a divorced raccoon. There were more charges. So many more. Boutique shopping at the hotel gift shop, probably buying more lingerie because apparently the suitcase full wasn't enough. Cocktails at the lobby bar. Late-night dessert at some French patisserie. Each charge was a nail in the coffin of our marriage. Each receipt a little piece of evidence that I carefully screenshotted and saved to a folder on my desktop labeled receipts, because I'm not creative under stress, but I am organized. That's when I knew. That's when the last little piece of doubt, that tiny voice that had been saying, "Maybe there's an explanation, maybe you're reading too much into this," finally shut up and accepted reality. My wife's business trip wasn't about business. It never had been. This was a vacation, a romantic getaway, a fair sampler platter funded by our joint checking account. This was Derek shooting his shot and Lydia not just catching it, but running with it all the way to the end zone, while I sat at home cheering for a team that didn't exist. I leaned back in my chair, stared at my laptop screen with all those charges lined up like evidence in a crime scene, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. That would come later. Right now. It was something calmer, something almost peaceful. It was clarity. It was certainty. It was the kind of understanding that comes when all the puzzle pieces finally click into place, and you see the full picture even though you wish you couldn't. My wife's business trip was about to become a career change, all right. A career change from married woman to defendant in divorce proceedings. From trusted partner to cautionary tale I tell at dinner parties. From love of my life to biggest mistake I ever made, and somehow also the best lesson I ever learned. I closed the laptop, finished my whiskey, and went to bed with a smile on my face. Not a happy smile, but the kind of smile you get when you know something nobody else knows yet, when you're holding cards in a game everyone thinks you're losing. I slept like a baby that night, the kind of sleep that comes from finally having enough evidence to stop questioning your sanity and start questioning your lawyer about retainer fees. Tomorrow was Sunday. Tomorrow she'd be flying back with more lies and excuses. Tomorrow the real fun would begin. But tonight I was at peace, wrapped in certainty and high thread count sheets, dreaming about a future that didn't include wondering where my wife was, or who she was with, or whether that heart emoji actually meant anything at all. Sunday morning came with a text message that should go down in history as one of the worst crafted lies ever committed to digital format. Right up there with the check is in the mail, and I totally read the terms and conditions. I was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee that tasted like victory and spite in equal measures, when my phone buzzed with Lydia's message at exactly 9:37 a.m. I knew the exact time because I screenshotted immediately, adding it to my growing collection of evidence that would make prosecutors weep with joy. Hey babe, don't worry. Traveling for a few more days. Back Monday. I'll explain everything later. I read it once, then twice, then a third time because surely I'd misunderstood something. Surely my wife hadn't just casually extended her 3-day business trip without asking, without discussing, without even pretending this was a mutual decision between two adults who were supposedly equal partners in a marriage. Don't worry, she said, like worry was the issue here and not the fact that she'd just unilaterally decided to spend more time away from home, more time with Derek, more time charging romantic dinners and couples massages to our credit card while I sat here wondering if I should change the locks or just burn the whole house down for the insurance money. Traveling for a few more days. Not the conference got extended. Not my boss needs me to stay for additional meetings. Just traveling. Like she was some free spirit backpacking through Europe instead of a married woman who'd apparently forgotten that marriage involves communication and consent and not just doing whatever the hell you want because you feel like it. And that sign-off, that beautiful piece of manipulation. I'll explain everything later. Later. The universal word people use when they don't have a good explanation now and are hoping you'll either forget to ask or they'll have time to craft a believable lie. I stared at that text message like it was a work of art, a masterpiece of terrible decision-making and worse communication skills. This was it. This was the moment where I could either continue being the understanding husband who waited patiently for explanations that would never come, or I could be the guy who finally grew a spine and called bullshit on the whole operation. Guess which option I chose? I smiled, and it wasn't one of those sad smiles or nervous smiles or even angry smiles. This was pure, unfiltered satisfaction, the kind of smile you get when you're about to deploy a nuke and you know the target has no idea it's coming. My fingers moved across the keyboard with the kind of purpose usually reserved for writing resignation letters or final exam essays, crafting a response that was only 7 words long but carried the weight of an encyclopedia of disappointment. Good. My lawyer loves stories. Send. And just like that, peace entered my soul like a goddamn dove carrying an olive branch made of justice and self-respect. I watched the message change from sending to delivered to read in the span of about 10 seconds, which told me everything I needed to know about how closely Lydia was monitoring her phone despite being so busy with her extended business traveling that she couldn't possibly communicate like a normal human being. The response was immediate. And by immediate, I mean 5 minutes later her phone started ringing with the kind of desperation usually reserved for people calling 911 or trying to reach their drug dealer. One call. Then 3 more in rapid succession. Then 12, because apparently Lydia had forgotten that you can't call someone into compliance, that you can't dial away the consequences of your actions like you're ordering pizza. Each call I ignored brought me more joy than the last. A little burst of serotonin every time my phone screen lit up with her contact photo, and I swiped it away like I was playing the world's most satisfying mobile game. When the calls didn't work, she switched to texts, because nothing says, "I respect you in our marriage," like harassment via multiple communication platforms. "What does that mean?" she wrote, like the sentence "My lawyer loves stories" was some kind of ancient riddle requiring a PhD in linguistics to decode. Like there was any ambiguity whatsoever in what I'd just said. Like lawyer was a word with multiple meanings, and she couldn't quite figure out which one I was referring to. I took my time responding, made myself another coffee, fed Max, who was probably the only family member who deserved my attention at this point, and then finally typed back with the kind of casual energy you use when discussing the weather or what's for dinner. Exactly what it sounds like, sweetheart. This sweetheart was a nice touch, I thought. That little sprinkle of passive-aggressive affection that really drove home how absolutely done I was with this entire situation. It's amazing how fast people find Wi-Fi when their secrets get signal strength. Suddenly the woman who'd been barely sleeping and so busy had all the time in the world to blow up my phone like it was New Year's Eve, and she was the fireworks display. More calls came through, each one more desperate than the last. Each one getting declined with the kind of satisfaction that really should be illegal because it felt too good to be morally acceptable. She tried calling from Derek's phone, which I knew because his contact info popped up, and I'd never been more tempted to answer, just to ask him how it felt to be complicit in the destruction of a marriage and whether he thought his PowerPoint presentation was worth it. But I didn't answer that either, because Derek didn't deserve my voice or my time or anything except maybe a strongly worded Yelp review of his character. The texts kept coming. "Mark, please." Then, "We need to talk." Then, "You're being unreasonable." That last one made me laugh so hard I almost spit out my coffee. I was being unreasonable. Me. The guy who'd stayed home like a loyal husband while his wife gallivanted around a luxury resort with her boss on the company dime and our joint credit card. I was the unreasonable one. The mental gymnastics required to reach that conclusion deserved an Olympic medal. My phone was basically having a seizure at this point, vibrating so much it was moving across the kitchen counter like it was trying to escape the sheer volume of panic emanating from Lydia's end of the digital conversation. But I just sat there, sipping my coffee, occasionally reaching over to decline another call, feeling more at peace than I had in months. Maybe years. Maybe ever since I'd said, "I do," to a woman who apparently heard, "I might," depending on better offers. This was it. The fire had started, and I hadn't even needed to light the match. Lydia had done all the work herself, built the pyre out of lies and bad decisions and couples massages, soaked it in champagne and room service charges, and all I'd done was send one text message and watch it all go up in flames. Beautiful, cleansing, absolutely justified flames that burned away 7 years of marriage and left nothing but clarity in their wake. Monday morning, I walked into the law offices of Mendoza and Associates with the kind of purpose you usually see in movie montages right before the protagonist destroys their enemies and claims victory. The office was on the 3rd floor of a building downtown that smelled like expensive leather and broken promises, which felt appropriate for a place where marriages came to die and assets got divided like nobody ever loved each other in the first place. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and the kind of knowing look that suggested she'd seen this exact scenario play out 1,000 times, smiled sympathetically when I told her I had an appointment with Grace Mendoza. "She's expecting you, Mr. Harrison. Second door on the left." Grace Mendoza was exactly the kind of lawyer you want when your life is imploding and you need someone who can slice through bullshit with surgical precision. She was in her early 40s, dressed in a power suit that probably cost more than my car, with dark hair pulled back in a bun so tight it looked like it meant business all by itself. Her office was immaculate, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal text that I'm sure she'd actually read, a desk made of some kind of wood that screamed, "I win cases, and I'm not sorry about it," and diplomas from universities that made my community college degree feel like a participation trophy. She stood up when I entered, shook my hand with a grip that could probably crush walnuts, and gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from her desk. "Mr. Harrison, I understand you're having some marital difficulties." The way she said it, so matter-of-fact and professional, made the whole nightmare feel manageable somehow, like this was just another problem with a solution rather than the complete destruction of everything I'd built over 7 years. "That's putting it mildly," I said, pulling out my phone and opening the folder I'd labeled Receipts, which now contained enough screenshots and documented evidence to fill a small novel. "My wife went on a business trip with her boss. Except it wasn't really a business trip, it was more like a romantic vacation funded by our joint credit card. And now she's extended it without asking because apparently our marriage operates on a unilateral decision-making model I wasn't informed about." I handed her my phone and watched as Grace scrolled through the evidence with the kind of focused attention that made me understand why her hourly rate was probably going to require me to take out a small loan. She looked at the text messages, the credit card statements, the social media posts from Nina that showed everyone except my wife, the charges for couples massages and romantic dinners and champagne that cost more than I made in a day. Her expression didn't change, professionally neutral, but I saw her eyebrow raise about 1/4 of an inch when she got to the $400 spa package. "So she's mixing work and pleasure," Grace said, not even bothering to make it a question because the evidence was pretty damn clear at this point. "Mostly pleasure," I replied, leaning back in my chair with the kind of exhausted satisfaction that comes from finally having someone else validate that you're not crazy, that your concerns are legitimate, that the situation is exactly as messed up as you think it is. "The work seems voluntary, optional, more like a cover story than an actual job responsibility. I'm pretty sure Derek's quarterly presentation could have been prepared via email and Zoom calls like every other normal company does, but apparently they needed to do it poolside with wine." Grace actually smirked at that, a tiny crack in her professional demeanor that told me she'd heard variations of this story before and had probably stopped being surprised by human stupidity somewhere around her 3rd year of practice. She handed my phone back and leaned forward, elbows on her desk, fingers steepled in that way lawyers do when they're about to tell you something important. "So what are we going for here, Mr. Harrison? Do you want this clean or loud? Do you want a quiet divorce with minimal drama? Or do you want to make a statement? Because I can do either, but the approach changes everything." I didn't even have to think about it. "Clean," I said immediately. "No shouting, no scandal, no dramatic confrontations that end up on social media or at family dinners for the next 20 years. Just legal poetry. Just clean, efficient, undeniable paperwork that makes it very clear who screwed up and who's walking away with their dignity intact." Grace nodded like I'd passed some kind of test, like I'd given the right answer that would make her job easier and my life better. "Smart choice. Loud is satisfying in the moment, but expensive in the long run. And trust me, you don't want to spend the next 5 years in court battles over who gets the coffee maker. We'll file for divorce on grounds of adultery with the evidence you've provided. In this state, that affects asset division. You've got documentation, timestamps, financial records. This is about as clean as these things get from an evidence standpoint." She started typing on her computer, pulling up forms and documents with the kind of efficiency that made it clear she'd done this so many times she could probably do it in her sleep. "We'll need to move quickly while the evidence is fresh and before she has time to craft a narrative or hide additional assets. I'll have the papers drawn up by end of business today. How do you want to handle service? You can have a process server deliver them, or we can arrange for her to be served in a more private setting if you prefer." "Whatever's fastest and most official," I said. I'm done being considerate of her feelings when she clearly hasn't been considerate of mine. She extended her vacation with her boss without asking. She can receive divorce papers without a courtesy warning. Seems fair to me. By the time I left Grace's office an hour later, the wheels were in motion. Papers were being prepared. A strategy was being formulated. My financial assets were being protected. Everything was happening with the kind of professional efficiency that made me wish I'd called a lawyer 3 days ago instead of spending the weekend spiraling into whiskey and detective work, though admittedly the detective work had been necessary to build the case that was now being assembled with terrifying precision. I stopped at a bakery on the way home because spite and sugar go together like peanut butter and jelly, like coffee and mornings, like adultery and divorce proceedings. I ordered a dozen cupcakes, custom decorated with little messages written in frosting. The baker, a cheerful woman in her 20s who was way too happy for someone working with buttercream at 10 in the morning, asked what I wanted them to say. Can you write best wishes, Derek, on half of them and congratulations on your freedom on the other half? I asked, sliding my credit card across the counter. She paused, looked at me with eyes that suddenly understood this wasn't a celebration in the traditional sense, and smiled knowingly. Rough day. Rough weekend, I corrected. But it's getting better by the hour. I left with a pink box full of passive-aggressive baked goods and a lawyer who was probably already drafting the kind of legal documents that would make Lydia regret every decision she'd made since Thursday morning. Grace Mendoza deserved a tip, maybe a bonus, possibly a statue erected in her honor for being the kind of professional who could take your worst day and turn it into a strategic victory. If I had to pay her hourly rate for the next few months, it would be worth every penny just to know that someone with her level of competence and ruthless efficiency was on my side. Nothing says closure quite like cupcakes that say best wishes to the man who helped destroy your marriage, and nothing says, I'm winning this divorce, quite like having Grace Mendoza in your corner with a folder full of evidence and a law degree she clearly knew how to use. While Lydia was out networking and building her career through methods that would definitely violate the employee handbook if anyone actually cared to enforce it, I decided to rebrand our marriage into what it should have been all along: a solo enterprise with clear boundaries and zero tolerance for bullshit. Monday afternoon, armed with Grace's legal advice, a hardware store receipt, and a level of petty determination that would make reality TV producers weep with joy, I began what I now refer to as the Great Lockout rebrand of 2025. First order of business, I boxed up Lydia's things. Not hastily, not in anger, but with the kind of methodical care you'd use when packing museum artifacts or dismantling a bomb. I folded every piece of clothing she'd left behind, organized her shoes by color and heel height because I'm not a monster, and carefully wrapped her collection of decorative candles that she'd never once lit because they were too pretty to burn, which in retrospect was a perfect metaphor for our marriage. Too pretty to actually use, just there for show, gathering dust while pretending to serve a purpose. I packed her toiletries, her makeup collection that required its own zip code, her 17 bottles of nail polish in shades that all looked identical to my colorblind eyes, and that stupid diffuser she'd bought from some Instagram influencer that was supposed to promote wellness, but mostly just made our bedroom smell like a yoga studio had exploded. Every item went into boxes labeled with blue painter's tape and a Sharpie, each one marked Career Growth Package. Return to sender, because I'm petty, but I'm also creative about it. Her books went into one box, the self-help titles about finding your authentic self and embracing your power stacked neatly on top of the romance novels she'd read poolside last summer, back when I thought we were still happy and not just pretending for the Instagram photos. Her craft supplies that she'd bought during her brief "I'm going to start an Etsy shop" phase went into another box, the unopened packages of scrapbooking materials serving as a monument to abandoned dreams and unfinished projects, much like our marriage. I even packed her collection of coffee mugs, the ones with inspirational quotes like "Boss Babe," and "She believed she could, so she did," which felt ironic now considering what she'd done was cheat on her husband and make terrible life choices. Those mugs went into a box with extra bubble wrap because despite everything, I wasn't trying to cost her money in broken ceramics. I was trying to cost her a marriage, not dishware. The photos came down next. Our wedding picture from the mantle, the one where we both looked so young and stupid and convinced we'd figured out something that clearly we hadn't. The vacation photos from our trip to Colorado, back when team building meant us building a relationship instead of her building something inappropriate with Derek. The candid shots from holidays and birthdays and random Tuesdays when we'd thought taking pictures of our dinner was important enough to document. All of it came down, got wrapped in newspaper, and went into a box labeled Ancient History, handle with indifference. Then came the locks. I'd stopped by Home Depot on my way back from the bakery, wandered through the security section like a man on a mission, and bought new deadbolts for both doors. The kind that required a key from both sides, because I wasn't taking any chances on Lydia letting herself in and trying to negotiate or explain or do whatever people do when they realize their actions have consequences. The hardware guy at the store, an older gentleman with kind eyes and calloused hands, had asked if I was upgrading for security reasons. You could say that. I'd replied. Keeping out unwanted elements. Smart man, he'd said. And I wondered how many other guys he'd sold locks to in similar situations, how many husbands had stood in that exact spot trying to protect what remained of their dignity and personal space. Installing the locks took about 40 minutes and required more swearing than I'd anticipated because apparently I'm better at emotional breakdowns than home improvement. But eventually both doors were secured with shiny new deadbolts that Lydia's keys would no longer open. I tested them multiple times, locked and unlocked them like a kid with a new toy, and felt a sense of satisfaction that probably wasn't healthy, but absolutely felt deserved. I wasn't being petty. Okay, I was being petty, but I was also being efficient. There's a difference between petty for the sake of being petty and petty as a strategic life choice that protects your peace and your property. This was the latter. This was self-care with a side of justified spite. This was me establishing boundaries that apparently needed to be established with physical barriers since emotional ones hadn't worked. Even Max seemed to understand what was happening. He'd been following me around all day, watching me pack boxes and change locks with those intelligent dog eyes that somehow always know more than they should. When I finally packed away the last of Lydia's things, when her perfume bottles were sealed in cardboard and her presence was officially erased from the immediate living space, Max sniffed once at the boxes stacked by the door, looked up at me, and then trotted over to his bed and lay down with a sigh that seemed to say, "Yeah, she's gone. Good riddance. Can we have dinner now?" That dog had more sense than I'd given him credit for. He stopped waiting at the door for her footsteps. He stopped perking up every time a car drove past the house. He just accepted it, moved on, adjusted to the new reality with the kind of emotional flexibility that humans spend thousands of dollars in therapy trying to achieve. When her perfume disappeared from the bathroom counter, when the air no longer smelled like whatever expensive fragrance she'd been wearing to impress Derek, Max didn't mourn it. He just went about his business like the house had always been this way, like Lydia had been a temporary resident who'd overstayed her welcome and finally checked out. That night, I poured myself a drink, the special occasion whiskey that was rapidly becoming my regular occasion whiskey at this rate, and turned off the porch light. That might sound like a small thing, insignificant even, but that porch light had been on every night for 7 years, a little beacon saying "Welcome home" to whoever needed it. Now it stayed off. The welcome mat got rolled up and shoved in the garage. The house went dark except for the rooms I was actually using, and I sat in my living room. My living room, singular possessive, no longer our living room, and slept like a man who'd finally deleted 2 gigabytes of emotional malware from his life's hard drive. No more wondering where she was. No more checking my phone every 10 minutes hoping for a text that would explain everything. No more lying awake at night doing mental gymnastics trying to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting, maybe there was a reasonable explanation, maybe I was just being insecure instead of observant. All that malware, all those corrupted files that had been slowing down my system and making everything harder than it needed to be, got permanently deleted with the changing of those locks. The boxes sat by the door like sentinels, like guards protecting my new peace. The locks gleamed in the hallway light, brass and new and uncompromised. The house felt lighter somehow, less cluttered, like removing one person's belongings had somehow removed years of accumulated tension and unspoken resentment. I stretched out on the couch, remote in hand, and watched whatever I wanted without negotiating or compromising or pretending to care about reality shows that made my brain hurt. This was it. The rebrand was complete. The locks were changed. The evidence was packaged. The lawyer was armed and ready. All that remained was for Lydia to come home and discover that home was no longer a place she had access to, that we had become me, and that her extended vacation with Derek had officially cost her everything she'd left behind. Monday, 11:12 a.m., and I was sitting in my living room drinking coffee and watching a home renovation show where people with unrealistic budgets complained about granite countertops when I heard it. The distinct sound of a key failing to do its one job. The scratching of metal against metal, the confused jiggling, the increasingly frustrated attempts to make a key work in a lock it no longer had any relationship with. It was music to my ears, a symphony of consequences playing out in real time on my front porch. Then came the knocking. Polite at first, the kind of knock you do when you think there's been some kind of mistake, some simple misunderstanding that can be cleared up with a conversation. Tap, tap, tap. Mark. Lydia's voice came through the door, confused but not yet panicked. Mark, my key's not working. Are you home? I took a long, slow sip of my coffee, savoring both the dark roast and the moment. Max looked up at me from his spot on the couch, tail wagging slightly, clearly wondering if we were going to acknowledge the person at the door or just continue enjoying our peaceful morning. I scratched behind his ears and counted to 10, letting her knock again before I responded. Oh no. I called through the door, my voice dripping with the kind of fake concern that wouldn't fool a toddler, but felt absolutely delicious to deliver. Must be that team-building retreat you went on. Guess they changed the locks on Honesty too, and the effects are spreading to actual locks. Crazy how that works. Maybe Derek knows a locksmith? He seems to know how to unlock a lot of things he shouldn't. The knocking stopped. There was a beat of silence, the kind of heavy pause that happens when someone's brain is trying to process information it doesn't want to accept, when reality is knocking on the door of delusion and delusion is pretending not to be home. Then the knocking resumed, harder this time, accompanied by the kind of voice that suggested panic was setting in. Mark, this isn't funny. Open the door. It's a little funny, I said, still not moving from my comfortable position on the couch. I mean, from where I'm sitting, drinking coffee in my house with locks that actually work, it's pretty entertaining. You should see it from my perspective. It's like watching a sitcom, except I already know the ending, and it's surprisingly satisfying. I heard her let out a sound of frustration, something between a groan and a scream, the kind of noise people make when they're realizing that their actions have consequences and they don't like it one bit. Part of me, a small part that still remembered being in love with this woman, felt a twinge of something that might have been guilt. But then I remembered the couple's massage charges, the romantic dinners, the champagne, and that twinge died faster than my trust in marriage vows. I stood up, walked to the door with Max following behind like my furry backup, and opened it exactly halfway. Not enough for her to push through, not enough for her to feel welcome, just enough to see her face and watch the realization dawn that this wasn't a joke or a misunderstanding or something that could be talked away with explanations and apologies. Her luggage was still neatly lined up on the porch where I'd placed it last night, 3 designer suitcases that had apparently been very necessary for her business conference, along with a manila envelope sitting on top like a cherry on the world's worst sundae. Lydia looked terrible, and I say that with the kind of objective observation that comes from no longer caring about someone's feelings. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged like she'd been crying or sleeping or both, and she was wearing the same outfit she'd left in 4 days ago, which suggested the return trip had been rushed and uncomfortable. Good. She deserved uncomfortable. Uncomfortable was the least of what she deserved. What's this? She asked, pointing at the manila envelope like it was a foreign object she'd never encountered before, like manila envelopes weren't universally recognized as the container for important documents, usually the kind that ruin your day or your life or both. Documents, receipts, and your favorite part, closure, I said, leaning against the doorframe with the kind of casual energy that suggested I had all day to stand here and watch her world crumble. The receipts are particularly interesting. Did you know the Grand Riviera Hotel itemizes their room service charges? Very detailed. Very thorough. Romantic charcuterie board for 2 foot really paints a picture, doesn't it? Really tells a story. My lawyer especially enjoyed that one. She actually laughed. Professional, composed Grace Mendoza laughed out loud when she saw that charge. Lydia's face went through about 17 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds, starting with confusion, moving through recognition, stopping briefly at denial, and finally settling on something that looked like panic mixed with regret and a dash of, oh shit, I really screwed up. She grabbed the manila envelope with shaking hands and started flipping through the papers, her eyes getting wider with each page. The divorce filing, the credit card statements highlighted in yellow, the screenshots of text messages, the printed social media posts, the timeline I'd created showing every charge and every lie. It was all there, organized alphabetically and chronologically, because if I was going to end a marriage, I was going to do it with the kind of attention to detail that would make accountants weep with pride. It's not what it looks like, she said, and I actually laughed out loud because that's what everyone says when they've been caught doing exactly what it looks like they were doing. It's the universal phrase of people who've run out of good lies and are desperately hoping that confidence alone will carry them through. Then it must be performance art, I replied, examining my fingernails like this conversation was boring me instead of giving me life. Experimental theater, maybe? The Unfaithful Wife, a study in bad decisions. Very avant-garde. Very bold. I especially liked Act 2 where you charged a couple's massage to our joint credit card. That was a nice touch. Really showed your commitment to the craft. Method acting at its finest. She started crying then, actual tears streaming down her face, and part of me waited to feel something. Sympathy, maybe. Regret. Some kind of softening that would make me question whether I was doing the right thing. But nothing came. I just stood there, hand on the door, watching her cry like I was watching a commercial for something I had no intention of buying. Those tears might have worked a week ago, might have made me doubt myself and wonder if I was overreacting. But that was before the receipts, before the lies, before I'd spent 72 hours cataloging every way she'd betrayed me and come to terms with the fact that our marriage had been dead long before she got on that plane. "Mark, please," she said through the tears, reaching for the door like she could push her way back into my life through sheer force of will and crying. "We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can work through it. It was a mistake. I made a mistake. Don't throw away 7 years over a mistake." "Oh, we already did therapy," I said, gently blocking her hand from the door. "The therapist's name is Grace Mendoza. She's fantastic with legal paperwork. Has a law degree from Yale and everything. Really helped me process my feelings, which apparently are justified and grounds for divorce in this state. Very healing. Would recommend. 5 stars on Yelp if lawyers did Yelp reviews, which they probably should because people need to know which ones are good at destroying bad marriages." Her face crumpled even more, which I didn't think was physically possible, but apparently rock bottom has a basement. "Mark, please. I love you. This doesn't have to end like this. I can explain everything. Just let me explain." "Sorry, honey," I said, and the honey came out with enough venom to kill a small horse. "My subscription to Nonsense expired. Turns out it was a limited time offer and you used up all the available episodes. Show's been canceled. No renewal. The network decided to go in a different direction, specifically a direction that doesn't include lying spouses who think business trip is code for romantic vacation with my boss. You understand. It's not me, it's you. Actually, it's entirely you. 100% you." I started to close the door, done with this conversation and ready to get back to my coffee before it got cold, but she grabbed the edge and held on. She tried bargaining next, because apparently we were going through the 5 stages of grief, except this was the 5 stages of realizing you destroyed your own marriage and nobody feels sorry for you. Her hand was still on the door, knuckles white from gripping the edge like it was a life raft, and she was drowning in a sea of her own terrible decisions, which honestly wasn't that far from the truth. "We can fix this, Mark," she said again, voice desperate now. That kind of desperation that comes when you realize you're losing something you took for granted, and suddenly it seems valuable again. "We can go to therapy. Real therapy, not lawyers. We can talk about this. Work through it. Marriage is about forgiveness, right? About working through problems together? That's what we promised each other. For better or worse, remember?" "Oh, I remember," I said, leaning against the doorframe with the kind of relaxed posture that suggested I had all day to stand here and dismantle her arguments one by one. "I remember a lot of things. I remember those vows. I also remember the part where you promised to forsake all others, and I'm pretty sure that includes Derek and his PowerPoint presentations and his shirtless pool photos and his ability to rack up $400 spa charges. Pretty sure forsaking doesn't include couples massages with your boss. But maybe I misunderstood the traditional wedding vows. Maybe there's a new edition that came out that includes an adultery clause I wasn't informed about." She flinched like I'd slapped her, which was interesting because apparently hearing about her own actions was more painful than actually committing them. "It wasn't like that," she said, the tears still flowing, but now mixed with this edge of anger, like she was mad at me for calling out her behavior instead of being mad at herself for actually doing it. "You're making it sound worse than it was. It was just, Derek and I were just." "Just what?" I interrupted, because I genuinely wanted to hear what explanation she'd cobbled together during her panic-fueled drive home. "Just accidentally spending our savings on romantic dinners?" Just coincidentally booking couple spa packages? Just somehow finding yourselves in situations that look exactly like cheating, smell exactly like cheating, and are documented with receipts that literally say romantic in the itemized charges? That kind of just? Because I've got to tell you, Lydia, that's a lot of accidents for someone who claims to be good at her job. Makes me wonder about your competency in general if you keep accidentally doing things that destroy your marriage. You're being cruel, she said, and there was that word again. Cruel. Like I was the villain in this story for having the audacity to respond to her infidelity with something other than understanding and forgiveness. Like cruelty was me changing the locks and not her spending 4 days in a luxury hotel with another man while lying to my face about it. No, I corrected her, my voice going cold in a way that made even Max perk up his ears. Cruel would be if I'd done what you did. Cruel would be if I'd lied to you, spent our money on another woman, extended a trip without asking, and then came home expecting you to just accept whatever half-baked explanation I threw at you. Cruel would be if I'd made you sit at home wondering what I was doing while I posted nothing on social media and charged romantic dinners to our credit card. What I'm being is honest. I'm being direct. I'm being exactly as cold as the situation warrants, which apparently feels cruel to you, because you've gotten used to me being a doormat who accepted your explanations without question. She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up my hand because I wasn't done yet, because 7 years of being the understanding husband had apparently built up a reserve of things I needed to say, and now the dam was breaking. You want to go to therapy? Fine. Go to therapy. Work on yourself. Figure out why you thought this was acceptable behavior. But you're going to do it alone, as a single woman, because I'm done. I'm done being the guy who waits at home. I'm done being Larry to Derek's sense of humor. I'm done checking my phone every 5 minutes hoping for a text from my own wife. I'm done pretending that marriages survive this kind of betrayal just because we've invested time into it. Sunk cost fallacy doesn't apply to relationships, sweetheart. Just because we've been together for 7 years doesn't mean I'm obligated to sign up for more. Mark, please, she tried again. But the please was getting weaker now, less convinced of its own power to change anything. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away. Think about what we built together. Think about our home, our life, our future. Think about. I am thinking about it, I said, and my voice was so calm it surprised even me. I'm thinking about how I built a life with someone I thought I knew, someone I trusted, someone who turned out to be completely different than who I thought she was. I'm thinking about how our home became a place where I waited alone while you were out building a different future with someone else. I'm thinking about how every time you said, I love you for the past few months, maybe longer, I don't even know anymore. You were already planning this or doing this or thinking about this. I'm thinking about all of it, Lydia, and you know what conclusion I keep coming to? That I deserve better. That I deserve someone who doesn't need a business trip to remember they're married. That I deserve honesty and respect and basic human decency, none of which you've shown me since you got on that plane Thursday morning. She was full-on sobbing now, the kind of crying that makes your whole body shake, and I waited to feel something other than vindication. Waited for the guilt to kick in, for the part of me that had loved her to resurface and make this harder. But it didn't come. There was just this clear, cold certainty that I was doing exactly the right thing, that this was the only acceptable response to what she'd done, that being kind now would just be another form of being a doormat. You're heartless, she said through the sobs, and I actually laughed at that because the irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife and serve it at one of Derek's romantic dinners. No, I said, shaking my head with a smile that probably looked terrifying because it was genuine. Just upgraded from naive to logical. From trusting to observant. From doormat to person with boundaries and self-respect. Heartless would be if I'd stopped loving you years ago and just stayed for convenience. What I am is someone who loved you enough to be completely destroyed by what you did, and who loves himself enough not to let that destruction become permanent. There's a difference. She started to say something else, probably another variation of please, or we can fix this, or some other phrase designed to buy time and create doubt, but I was done with the conversation. I'd said what I needed to say, she'd heard what she needed to hear, and standing in this doorway wasn't going to change anything except make my coffee get cold and waste my time. The papers are in the envelope, I said, Gesturing to the manila folder, she was still clutching like it might transform into something less life-threatening if she just held it tight enough. My lawyer's contact information is on page 3. Her rates are reasonable, her track record is excellent, and she doesn't put up with bullshit, which is refreshing after dealing with your explanations for the past 5 months of working late that I now realize were probably not actually work-related. You've got 30 days to respond to the filing. After that, it proceeds whether you cooperate or not. Your stuff is in the boxes. I was very careful with it because unlike some people, I still have basic respect for other people's property even when they've lost my respect in every other way. She wheeled her suitcase toward the boxes, moving like someone in a dream or a nightmare, her hands shaking as she tried to figure out the logistics of transporting 3 suitcases and 5 boxes full of her belongings to wherever she was planning to go next. Probably Derek's place, I thought with a spike of bitter satisfaction. Probably she'd call him crying, and he'd come get her, and they'd console each other about what a terrible person I was for not just accepting infidelity as a normal part of modern marriage. As she struggled with the boxes, Mrs. Alvarez from next door peeked over our shared fence, her perfectly coiffed white hair catching the sunlight, and her eyes bright, with the kind of curiosity that suggested she'd been watching this entire interaction like it was her personal Netflix drama. Mrs. Alvarez was 73, had been widowed for a decade, and had the kind of nosiness that comes from having too much time and not enough excitement in her daily routine. She was also sweet as pie and had brought me casseroles twice since Lydia left, so I couldn't be mad at her for being interested in the neighborhood drama. "Everything okay, dear?" she called over the fence, her voice full of concern that was probably 80% genuine and 20% desire for gossip to share at her bridge club. "Everything's being audited, Mrs. Alvarez," I called back, giving her a wave and a smile that was probably the most genuine expression I'd made all morning. "Spring cleaning came early this year. Getting rid of things that don't serve me anymore. You know how it is. Out with the old, in with the peace and quiet." The look on Mrs. Alvarez's face was absolutely priceless. This mixture of shock and understanding and barely suppressed glee that told me she knew exactly what was happening and would be dining out on this story for months. She gave me a thumbs up that was probably inappropriate for the situation but felt completely warranted, and I gave her one back because apparently we were now partners in the neighborhood drama, and I was okay with that. Lydia shot Mrs. Alvarez a look that could have melted steel, grabbed as many boxes as she could carry, and started loading them into her car with the kind of angry efficiency that comes from embarrassment mixed with defeat. I watched from the doorway, coffee in hand, Max sitting beside me like the world's most supportive wingman, and felt absolutely nothing except relief that this was finally happening, that the pretending was over, that I could finally start the process of becoming someone who didn't check his phone obsessively or wonder where his wife was or accept explanations that didn't actually explain anything. Weeks later, life had settled into something that felt weirdly peaceful, like the calm after a storm, except the storm had been 7 years long, and I'd been standing in it pretending it was just light rain. The house smelled different now, less like floral guilt and expensive perfume designed to impress bosses who couldn't keep their boundaries professional, and more like WD-40 and the kind of simple existence that comes from not having to wonder where someone is, or what they're doing, or whether that heart emoji actually means anything. I'd gotten into a routine that didn't involve checking my phone every 45 seconds or analyzing text messages for hidden meanings. I woke up when I wanted, made coffee how I liked it without someone complaining it was too strong, and spent my evenings doing whatever the hell I felt like doing without negotiating or compromising or pretending to care about reality shows that made my brain hurt. It was glorious. It was peaceful. It was everything I didn't know I'd been missing while I was busy being married to someone who apparently saw our vows as more of a suggestion than a binding agreement. Jason, my coworker and the closest thing I had to a best friend in the traditional sense, cornered me by the coffee machine at work one Tuesday morning with the kind of knowing look that suggested he'd been waiting for the right moment to comment on my apparent transformation. Jason was one of those perpetually single guys who swore up and down that marriage was a trap and he was too smart to fall for it, which always felt like protesting too much, but now seemed oddly prescient. "Man, you're glowing," he said, pouring himself a cup of the sludge our office tried to pass off as coffee. "Like actually glowing. You get a new skincare routine or something?" Because whatever you're doing, it's working. You look 10 years younger. Did you discover the fountain of youth, or did you just discover being single? Freedom and no phone checking at 2 in the morning. I replied, adding sugar to my cup with the kind of casual energy that came from actually sleeping through the night, instead of lying awake wondering if my wife was texting someone who wasn't me. Highly recommended. 10 out of 10, would divorce again. Actually, no, I wouldn't, because I'm never getting married again, but if I did, I'd definitely divorce if necessary. Really clears the complexion. Does wonders for your mental health. Should be prescribed by doctors instead of antidepressants. Jason laughed, the kind of laugh that said he knew exactly what I was talking about, even though he'd never been married himself. Dude, I tried to warn you. Remember at your bachelor party? I said marriage was just a legally binding agreement to be disappointed for the rest of your life. You said I was cynical. Who's cynical now? You're still cynical, I said, taking a sip of terrible coffee that somehow tasted better now that I wasn't drinking it while stressed about my crumbling marriage. But you were also right, which is annoying. Don't let it go to your head. Your ego's already insufferable. The divorce had been proceeding smoothly, which apparently happens when you have overwhelming evidence and a lawyer who doesn't mess around. Grace had called last week to tell me that Lydia's lawyer had reviewed the case and strongly advised her to settle rather than drag this out in court, where all those receipts would become public record. Smart move on their part. Less smart was Lydia's decision to cheat in the first place, but apparently wisdom wasn't her strong suit. Lydia's mom had texted me about a week after the lockout incident. One of those messages that started with, "I heard what happened," and ended with, "Can you tell me your side of the story?" Like there were multiple valid interpretations of credit card statements showing couples massages and romantic dinners. I debated ignoring it, but ultimately decided that honesty was the best policy, especially when honesty involved forwarding screenshots of receipts. Check the receipts, I texted back. They tell it better than I ever could. Specifically the one for the romantic charcuterie board for two. Really paints a picture. Very illuminating. Your daughter has excellent taste in expensive cheese that she paid for with our joint account. She hadn't responded after that, which I took as either acceptance of the facts or the realization that her daughter had screwed up so spectacularly that there wasn't really a defense to be mounted. Either way, I appreciated the silence. Silence was underrated. Silence meant nobody was trying to explain away the unexplainable or make excuses for the inexcusable. Cass, one of Lydia's old friends from college who'd somehow remained friendly with me throughout the years, messaged me out of the blue on a Saturday afternoon while I was in the garage working on my motorcycle, which I'd finally had time to fix now that my evenings weren't spent pretending everything was fine in my marriage. "Do you regret it?" her message read, and I could practically hear the concern in her digital voice, the kind of worry that comes from people who still believe in working things out and second chances and all those concepts that sound great in theory, but ignore the reality of betrayal. I wiped the grease off my hands, picked up my phone, and typed back without hesitation. Only that I didn't hire Grace sooner. Could have saved myself months of wondering if I was crazy for being suspicious. Turns out I wasn't crazy, just married to someone who thought business trips were a valid excuse for bad behavior. Live and learn. Actually, divorce and learn. That's the new motto. Cass sent back a crying laughing emoji followed by, "Fair enough. You deserve better." It was nice to have that acknowledgement, that validation from someone who'd known both of us and could objectively see that I wasn't the villain in this story, that I'd done exactly what any reasonable person would do when faced with overwhelming evidence of infidelity and zero remorse. Now I spent my evenings doing things I actually enjoyed instead of things I'd convinced myself were couple activities. I grilled steaks that were seasoned exactly how I liked them without anyone complaining they were too peppery. I fixed my motorcycle, that 1987 Harley Sportster I'd bought before the wedding and barely touched during the marriage because Lydia thought it was dangerous and a waste of money, ignoring the irony that her romantic getaway with Derek had cost approximately 3 times what the bike was worth. I watched sports without commentary from someone who didn't understand why grown men cared about balls going into nets or over lines. I listened to music at volumes that weren't unreasonable just because someone else had different preferences. I existed in my own space on my own terms, and it felt better than any marriage had ever felt, which probably said something profound about the state of that marriage, but I was too busy enjoying my freedom to analyze it too deeply. The moral of this entire story, if there was one beyond, don't marry people who think company retreats are legitimate excuses for infidelity, was simple. Never argue with liars. Don't engage in debates about what happened or what things mean or whether you're overreacting. Just hand them paperwork. Let the lawyers and the receipts do the talking. Let the evidence speak for itself while you sit back and enjoy the peace that comes from no longer having to defend reality to people who've chosen to live in fantasy land. And for the record, because I know you're wondering, I sleep great. Like a baby. Like someone who's finally figured out that being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who makes you feel alone. Peace and silence are underrated, especially in a world that tells you marriage is the ultimate goal and being single is somehow failure. Turns out the real failure was staying in a situation that required me to ignore my instincts and accept explanations that didn't explain anything. Lydia is still trying to explain everything later, according to mutual friends who can't help but update me on her life, even though I've made it clear I don't care. Apparently, later still hasn't arrived, which tracks with her general approach to honesty and accountability. Meanwhile, I'm living my best life with a clean conscience, a cleaner house, and the kind of emotional clarity that only comes from finally choosing yourself over someone who was never going to choose you back. The divorce will be final in about 2 months. I've already planned a party. Nothing huge, just close friends, good whiskey, and maybe those cupcakes from the bakery that understood the assignment the first time. Jason's bringing steaks. Mrs. Alvarez is bringing her famous potato salad and probably some gossip from the neighborhood watch meetings. Max is bringing his A-game cuteness and the unconditional love that only dogs can provide. It's going to be perfect, just like my life is now, just like it should have been all along. Turns out happiness was always an option. I just had to be willing to change the locks to find it.